Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Winchesters Season 1, Episode 12. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, our monster of the week is a creepy clown, which I'm like, I don't have the clown thing, phobia of just being scared of clowns, which I'm not going to blame anyone that does, but because it does seem like, once again, I always see that kind of utilized in that regard. I can understand why. Clowns can be creepy under kind of any circumstances. I mean, I'm sure Pennywise didn't do clowns any justice, but it's like, Pennywise tends to go up there, like, with the killer clowns type of, like, probably the scariest ones. So it is that situation of, the fact of the matter is, especially just this episode in particular, when you start adding it like a supernatural element to it, you're like, yeah, clowns are super creepy. But the context of this is this clown named Limbo who basically draws in people that are unhappy. And the whole thing is like, hey, I get to keep my happiness. And Limbo, like, everything kind of fell apart for Limbo. The troupe he was a part of basically ended up breaking up, or there was, I think basically the carnival they were a part of ended up losing money because of just things kind of going sideways. And basically he wanted eternal happiness. So he has basically like an enchanted mirror that basically traps you in a state of happiness, and it keeps him happy. It's actually kind of sad because it all kind of builds upon itself of like, right, all of his victims are people who are trying to escape something and they want some happiness, and he himself kind of feeds off of that need. Keeping them happy keeps him happy because he's kind of a victim of it himself. You know, it's actually quite sad, but it's like his situation is, he uses people, his victims, to kind of be fuel for his own continuation, his own happiness. But yeah, like John and Mary aren't in the best place. It seems like John has kind of had a chip on his shoulder after everything last episode. Understandably, it's like, right, people accusing you of doing something you didn't do. The fact of the matter is, it's bad enough, I think he finally found his footing back at home, just to have it all kind of swept from underneath him. Like, I think kind of really frustrated him of like, right, I can't go back home until my name is cleared, and there's no guarantee to know how long that's going to last. So he used to say, hey, me and Mary, oh, this is kind of us on vacation. But Mary's like, yeah, but you've been kind of acting a little angry. Like, you're kind of letting your anger get the best of you, which, once again, it's kind of a sad thing that it's like, yeah, it's a big part of John's character. It's something that he tries to deal with, but we know, and once I talked about this earlier in the series too, like, that's a sad part. We know that that's a part of him, He probably did a lot to fix it, but Mary's death probably finally pushed him over the edge to kind of revert back to that. Like, that trauma and pain just never ever fully went away. It is just a thing that he had so much in his life that kind of helped subside that, but the moment Mary died, it kind of got reinvigorated. So, but yeah, that, like, this deep anger he has, like, it's just, and it is something that keeps popping up about him, from like how easily he can lose his cool, but because it's like, right, it's a symptom of something much larger that he isn't quite dealing with, and hasn't quite dealt with, so especially not dealt with properly. But because obviously we know, like, Carlos is still, I think he's still, because I think he references the VA situation, again, this episode, like, he was like, oh yeah, the doctor he's going to see. It's like, yeah, showing that Carlos is still, like, processing and dealing with stuff properly. John still isn't. I mean, he did the whole meditation thing, but even like last episode, Lotta was like, yeah, he hasn't done it for a while. So every time he's taken steps forward to try and mediate that situation, it always kind of falters through to some extent. So, but yeah, like, Mary keeps trying to ask him if he's okay, and it's just John kind of doubles down, like, I'm fine. Like, why do you want to act like there's something wrong when I'm telling you I'm fine? And talking to Carlos later, Mary and him talk about, right, everyone kind of handles their grief and their anger, just everything that they're dealing with in their own way. But Mary for Mary, it's just a situation of, she can tell John's in pain and she can't help him. He won't let her help him either. So And makes matters worse is that later on he chews her out because he's like, right, you want to talk about me avoiding stuff. What about you? Have you done anything? Like, you've had this whole thing about like, right, once hunting's over, once this Akrita thing's dealt with, I'm going to like live my life. I'm putting hunting in the rear view. But it's like, right, you got accepted into that college, but have you actually like submitted anything for it? It's like you are kind of running from your future. It's not just, which is obviously a little bit of projecting on John's part, because I mean, no matter what he's saying is true, even Mary admits it later, but it's still a thing of you're deflecting your own, you're deflecting the fact is that, you know, just because you're right about Mary doesn't make her wrong about you. And they both come to realize like, yeah, we were both kind of right about each other, that we weren't I wasn't properly dealing with everything. I was kind of avoiding everything. Mary was kind of doubling down because she kind of got the thought of the future was scary. So both of them were kind of avoiding things in their own regard. So I was curious about that guy that was following them, but it was interesting to find out, oh, that guy is, his name is Clarence. His brother was taken by Limbo like, 30 years ago or something. Like, I was like, that's heartbreaking. And it was like, yeah, it happened at a time when his mom and dad had died in an accident. He was all his brother had. But it's like, right, we were 8 years apart. We didn't really have much in common. And then you add into that, like, hey, I brought him to this carnival because I thought it would, you know, cheer him up. But, you know, it led to all of this. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I think the entire episode made you go like, oh, obviously Limbo's going to go after John. Mary being the first one was kind of interesting, but ultimately getting John too. Like it was like a 2-for-1 special kind of, but it was like, I was like, oh, is Mary going to, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Cause once again, it just seemed like, oh, John seemed like the obvious choice, but after their fight, it's just, I think it made her start wondering about her own, you know, she wanted to be happy too. And obviously think about the future was scary, and it really, both of them had some stuff that they were dealing with. I mean, I think eventually probably would have gone after Lotta and Carlos, but maybe not. Maybe that's why it's like, oh, just have the clowns rip them apart because they had their cathartic moments last episode. So maybe that, like, Lotta's kind of in the healing process, having opened up to Carlos last episode about her past, about, you know, what kind of drove her from home. So I think maybe that's why, Limbo didn't really go after him, was just kind of like, yeah, me and my clown posse are going to rip you apart. But this all happened because Carlos, they were able to stop all this because Carlos was able to reach out to Clarence's brother. It's like, right, I know what it's like to lose both of your parents. The fact of the matter is you feel like you're so alone in this world. But he's like, I have the people, I have my family around me, like, you know, the team. It's like, yeah, I have people around me who love me. And that's the same thing for your brother. And that I think it's also because he's young enough that, you know, Carlos was able to kind of reach out to him and make him kind of remember, wait, I do have my brother out there waiting for me. Because that was also John saying, like, right, because Mary had tried to convince him to be like, hey, we should stay here, you know, we can be happy. But he's like, yeah, but it'd be a false happiness, you know? And that's the thing of like, yes, reality isn't always peachy, but like this happiness, no matter what it is only going to be, it's going to be temporary. It's never going to be, you know, I mean, it's not temporary. It's going to be forever, but it's going to be a facade. It's not going to be the real thing. I even thought it was interesting that when John became a clown, he ended up like crying a single tear, which Mary was like, oh, like, weren't you like really happy? And I was almost like, it seemed like John kind of wasn't. It felt like maybe some remnant of what he's feeling, or his feelings were so strong that it was kind of breaking through the mask of this whole happiness facade. But it's that's a complicated situation that they've got going on, where it's like, yeah, Clarence and his brother were initially 8 years apart. Now they're 38 years apart in age. But it's like, hey, at the end of the day, regardless of it's going to complicate things, it's still a thing of they have each other now. And I think Clarence might probably in a better position to kind of help his little brother maybe than he was before. I mean, a lot. That's a whole story in itself. I mean, we'll never get an update on that probably, most likely, but it's still kind of like I mean, 'cause we have no idea the rest of those, like, obviously, what was it, Wally? He was, like, recently taken, so, but who knows how those other victims, like, how long it's been since they were taken. Clarence's brother might, I don't know, because, Limbo has been around, like, he was a clown in, like, the 20s. I mean, who knows when it was specifically he made his deal, it's, so, there's still, like, that's at least, like, roughly speaking, like a 50-year period of, like, people getting snatched up, so. On the other side of the episode, we have Ada meeting with some witches, and you're like, man, I don't know if we've ever really gotten notice of, like, how cliquey witches are. It's kind of like, wow, like, it's just kind of like, oh, you're kind of like you're an amateur amongst us, like, this is kind of high stakes game only for, like, real witches. We know who you are, Ada. Rather than banishing demons, you're basically trapping them in trees and stuff. It's like, kind of putting Ada down because she's not, and I was wondering if Ada was kind of playing this up about, like, being, kind of luring these witches into a false sense of security of being like, oh, looks like, oh, I want, but it's always like the card dealing thing of, like, right, the moment you show your hand first, you're like, yeah, you lost. It's just like, I got, haha, and it's like, no, the other witch won. It's like, that's typically how that's always represented in shows and stuff of, like, yeah, when, show one hand, the person who shows their hand first typically always ends up losing. Not always, but more often than not. I was like, I thought they were going to, like I said, I thought, like, Ada was, like, luring them into a false sense of security to try and get what she wants, but it's like, no, turns out it's not. Apparently, also, witches are doubling down, and they're like, no, we're not going to worry about this whole Akrita thing, because there's nothing you can do. It's destined. There's no stopping it. Stopping it's impossible. So, what you need to do is find you a coven so that you can all summon enough magic to protect yourself, which I'm like, will that actually work? I mean, aren't there maybe the Akrita aren't on the world destruction tour that I feel like I thought they were. I guess in my head, I'm treating it kind of like a God situation where, like, he was just, like, destroying worlds left and right, kind of thought, but it's like, no, the Kree are, like, invading this world to kind of make it their own, so it's like, it's more of an invasion, but I'm like, did you think you'd kind of be able to, like, hunker down and kind of avoid all of this? Which I guess you can also make that a parallel to this, to the whole Marion, more specifically with the whole John thing of avoidance, is like, the Witchers are kind of doing that too, just like, yeah, we need to double down, hook up with a coven, but they try to put Ada on the spot. It's like, right, you need, like, a great amount of magic to kind of protect themselves from the Akrita. That's why you need to be in a coven. But she's like, the lead witch there being like, yo, no witch is going to want to, like, join in a coven with you, Ada. But that's when she runs into a familiar face to us. And I saw her name in the opening credits. I was like, what? That's super dope. It's Ruth Connell returning as Rowena. Obviously, which is weird to say returning, considering, once again, this is a prequel, but it's still applicable. I think in my head, I always say her name is Ruth Connolly, but it's Ruth Connell. I always put Connell in her name, but regardless, I was like, yeah! I was like, that's what I love about this, that, yes, because it is the supernatural element to it, like our more supernatural characters from Supernatural, we can see pop up in some shape or form, so, and it's like, yeah, I want to talk to that demon about, I'm looking for my son. I'm like, yeah, you are. Because I actually, I love Rowena. I don't remember the first episode she popped up in. I don't remember her introduction in the show. I mean, I know where her story ends up. I mean, because when I started thinking about it, I was like, oh, it's sad. But then also I'm like, it's like, well, no, she's queen of hell, so it all works out. And it's very poetic considering, Crowley was king of hell, and now, like, the throne got passed to his mom, interestingly enough. So it's kind of a sad situation, but at the same time, you're like, it all worked out for Rowena. Like, she's worshipped like the queen she is. So, but that's pretty dope. And then, like, her tricking Ada, wanting to get close to Ada. She's like, oh, yeah, like, I wanted that demon you had trapped. Because most people, when they deal with a demon, it's like, you're sending it straight back to hell. But it's like, hey, here's one on Earth I can easily get to, find out about my son. But also, she took an interest in Ada. Because she's also like, I wonder if that was before or after. She was like, the whole thing was a test. Because she saw the potential inside of Ada. That none of the other witches could see. I also love they do have the commonality of complicated son relationships. I didn't even think about that, a witch with a complicated son situation. I didn't even think about that when Ada showed up, and it's like, oh, her talking about her son. It's like, oh, and then Ada was like, yeah, I have a son too. And I was like, I never made those parallels. Obviously, like, her and Tony are in a better, despite the complications, her and Tony are in a better place than, obviously, it's going to be a while before, I was literally about to say Ruth, before Rowena and Crowley get there. So I'm trying to remember, it's like, did they get there? To some extent, I think they did. It's been wait. Oh God, like I said, I just don't remember. It's been a while. I think they got there to some extent. Before he died, maybe? I don't know. But either way, Rowena ended up seeing, like I said before, the potential inside of Ada, and she's a lot more powerful than she kind of gives herself credit for. I guess it's because she doesn't, like, really lean into the witchness, which I think maybe that could end up being an issue later on, especially when Rowena's like, cool, I have this gift for you. But the thing is, it'll give you the power to kill the queen. But the problem is, you're going to need a special ingredient. It's going to need a little piece of your soul. I'm like, this continuity loves that soul thing. Because I think it's such an interesting, it's like, right. We've seen what it's, because she was like, oh yeah, but once you do this, you'll never quite be the same. It's like, yeah, we've seen. I mean, I think she said specifically a fraction of it. At first, I was like, immediately in my brain, I was like, oh, we're going a little preacher here. But then I was like, well, I also know, like, because I don't know if that's from the graphic novel or not. Because I know, like, obviously, Preacher, like, at least the graphic novel obviously predates Supernatural. But my reference to that is the show, because Jesse lost, like, the smallest fraction of his soul, and how much of an impact that had on him. But obviously, once again, we've seen the soulless situation, and obviously, it's even closer to home in this regard because obviously it happens to Sam. I mean, maybe you can make some argument, Dean, but it wasn't really losing your soul. It's just your soul turning into a demon. You were turning into a demon and became a demon. So it's not quite the same as, like, Sam straight up literally losing his soul because it's trapped in the cage with Michael and Lucifer. But still. And Ada's not telling the rest of the team about it either. Because she's just like, no, I'm just that good, because she doesn't want, because if they found out, they probably wouldn't want her using that weapon. But it's like, right, we're desperate. Rowena had warned him, like, oh, like the attack's coming when 5 planets align, and Lata's looking at it, and it's like, yo, that's happening, like, very soon. And so we also apparently they found Millie and Betty found a witness that says, like, oh yeah, I saw Kyle go into that garage after he had already called 911, even though he had said, like, oh, I'm already here, but he came and went to the garage after the fact. So it's like a lawyer apparently will be able to use that to kind of, I guess, like, clear up John's name. We'll see how that kind of works out, but he is able to come home now, so we'll see if there's going to be any lasting ramifications for that, or that just going to get completely settled off screen. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where all the takes us going forward. Really quickly, I thought it was interesting where Rowena was like, yeah, like, when this is all said and done, like, find me, I'd love you to be part of my covenant. It's like, well, we know that doesn't work out because, which obviously plays into where you're like, it does make you wonder what does happen to Ada. I wonder, because like I said, it was only a fraction of her soul. I don't think it's all of her soul. Was it all of her soul? Because Rowena said it was only going to be a fraction. But then part of me was like, even a fraction of your soul is still going to be enough to change you. So it makes you automatically start being like, yeah, that feels like they're going to start up a very tragic circumstance and situation for Ada, so. Because obviously, I want to say Ruth. Rowena didn't have a coven when she was first introduced. I mean, she never found a coven. She was always kind of like a solo act. But I think she tried to meet up with other covens, but I think it just never really worked out over the course of the show, if I remember correctly. It's been a while, so my memory's probably not that great. But either way, I'm very, very interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us. going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good